WVCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Friends, we thank you for joining us on Crosstalk here on VCY America. As we speak, the 30th session of the United Nations Climate Change Conference is underway in Brazil. It's one that brings in eco-zealots from around the world. And keep in mind, it was this type of conference that just 10 years ago, some 195 parties signed the so-called Paris Agreement. That was really a treaty to set emission standards, etc. President Trump has pulled us out of that agreement. But it's my opinion that this conference going on right now is steeped with rank hypocrisy and really poses a significant threat to the sovereignty of nations as well as to personal liberty. The shorter name for this event is COP30, a conference to the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Again, the shorter name is COP30. Our guest today is in Brazil as we speak, attending the conference, which, by the way, has just been evacuated in the last few hours due to a fire that broke out. With us right now is Alex Newman. He is an award-winning international freelance journalist. He is an author and researcher, educator, and consultant, senior editor for the New American, and his programs Behind the Deep State airs on TV30, written several books. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today from Brazil.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much for having me, Jim.
So tell us about this fire that broke out.
So we were there. Actually, we were doing an interview. We were in the process of interviewing an artist who made a grotesque statue of Donald Trump that was on display right there by the entrance. It was a naked and very obese Donald Trump sitting on the shoulders of a skeletal figure. It was called King of Injustice, just showcasing how incredibly terrible the American president was for trying to interfere with saving Mother Earth from the horrors of climate change and carbon dioxide emissions. And suddenly we started seeing a large cloud of black smoke right behind this. We were maybe a few hundred feet from where the smoke was billowing out of the conference, and large numbers of people, thousands of people, started running out of there, some of them shouting. We don't have all the details yet. However, the UN has told us that this appears to have been some sort of electrical issue. It happened near Communist China's booth. Communist China has an enormous booth on display here. It's China at COP30. They're very, very, very pleased with what's going on here as Western countries continue to destroy their energy infrastructure, shut down their manufacturing, and ship all their productive capacity to Communist China. But, big fire. Everybody's been evacuated. They're talking now about opening the conference hall back up sometime around 8 p.m., assuming everything checks out. But for the moment, it's all shut down. Everybody's been removed except they actually said it's back under Brazilian sovereignty now, so they've got Brazilian authorities, Brazilian firefighters there dealing with the situation. And we don't know exactly what happened yet, but hopefully we'll know more soon.
So they removed the Brazilian sovereignty during the conference?
Yes. Whenever one of these UN conferences sets up, they claim it's international jurisdiction. And so we've had these issues before. We were at the climate change conference in Paris some years ago, and we had an agent of the mass-murdering communist Chinese dictatorship following us around taking pictures of us, and we filed an official report, of course. The international authorities, the UN has its own police and security service. They told us they couldn't do anything because the delegation has diplomatic immunity, and we filed a report with the French Interior Ministry, which handles policing and justice, and they also told us they couldn't do anything because it was under UN sovereignty, and so they had no jurisdiction there. So that's what happens when these UN conferences pop up. The UN takes over a small piece of territory, which becomes international, and the national authorities have no jurisdiction unless they're specifically permitted to do something by the UN.
Now, mentioning the CCP just moments ago, I understand they came with an official gift to Brazil.
They did. I think a really significant story for those of us who love the Lord, who believe God's Word. We understand that this is not really a battle over science or climate or politics or even economics. Really, it's a spiritual war. And I could not have come up with a more fitting logo, icon, idol for this conference to try to encapsulate the nature of this spiritual battle if I had been trying to do it myself. We did get some pictures of it. People can find it on my X account if they go to AlexNewman_JOU. We will, of course, be using it for the articles that come out in the New American magazine. We'll be using it everywhere we can. But I encourage people to take a look at it. It is a very clearly demonic figure. They're calling it the guardian spirit, and they say it's a mixture of a jaguar to represent the Amazon in Brazil, and then the dragon to represent China. It's a horrific figure. It's got these giant horns on it, and it's holding the whole world in its hands. It's very, very creepy. But, yeah, this is the official gift from the CCP, the dragon, to Brazil for the COP30.
Wow. Alex Newman is in Brazil right now. COP30 is underway. Alex, what is the agenda of this conference?
Well, there's multiple agendas being pursued simultaneously, but I'd say the overarching agenda is to build up a one-world political, economic, and religious system and impose it on humanity. By necessity, that involves removing the United States, or at least what we understand to be the United States, the biblical principles, our Constitution, the notions of God-given rights. You got to remove that, and then you got to build back better. And so there's a whole bunch of different agendas at work here. There's endless numbers of special interest groups trying to pursue their own thing. We just spoke with a guy who wanted to have taxes on meat. There's all these smaller special interests. But the big goal is to empower the United Nations to rule over humanity under the guise of keeping us safe from carbon emissions. What they call carbon emissions, really they're talking about carbon dioxide, which is the gas we exhale. They claim that this is causing global warming. Of course, we do not believe that based on the science that we have seen, the people we have interviewed. In fact, there's a lot of articles and studies in the peer-reviewed literature suggesting that CO2 is not actually the culprit of the little tiny bit of warming that's been observed over the last few decades. But they're using that as a pretext to undermine the sovereignty of nations. Right? They're saying it's a global problem and therefore it requires global solutions. They're using it as a pretext to rearrange the economy. They're using it as a pretext to shut down industry, manufacturing, and production across the Western world and move it all to China and Brazil and places like that. And then the spiritual element, too, is very clear. Right? They're trying to bring all the religions of the world together to create a new synchronistic system that includes morality and spirituality and all of that. And this is proceeding very openly now, right? One of the things that was so interesting about this weird gift that the CCP gave to Brazil is the number of Brazilians saying, no, Brazil belongs to Jesus Christ. Get this abomination out of our country. So there's still a lot of resistance to the agenda. But you and I have talked before, Jim. In Egypt, they unveiled the new, supposedly improved Ten Commandments.
Yep.
One of the organizers of that festival told us they were coming up with a third covenant now to build heaven on earth. So there is a clear spiritual agenda, bring all the religions of the world together. Pope Leo gave a nod to this just a couple days ago, and that is, I think, one of the big focuses here.
In my introduction, Alex, I said it's my opinion that this conference is just steeped in rank hypocrisy, and I'd like to talk about the location for this conference. There's one of the goals have been to end deforestation, but didn't they carve a 4-lane highway right through protected portions of the Amazon rainforest?
They are working on that. In fact, we are on our way there right this moment. We pulled over to do the interview, but we're trying to track that down right now. The Brazilian government's apparently very sensitive about this. They've blocked it off with police and military. They're trying to prevent reporters from going there. So the BBC broke that story some months ago, that they carved a 4-lane highway, apparently took down tens of thousands of acres of protected rainforest to do it. But I will say, Jim, the traffic in this city is absolutely horrendous. We have spent many hours sitting in traffic. They definitely need some additional infrastructure. So I don't hold the Brazilian government or the state government here responsible for trying to ease the traffic congestion a little bit and make it easier for the people. But it is very interesting that they took down so much protected rainforest. Quite ironically, Jim, they didn't actually finish in time. So it's a double embarrassment to the Brazilian government. A lot of independent media outlets in the United States and Canada have been covering it. Mm-hmm. But, it's very ironic. I mean, the carbon footprint of this thing, too, really illustrates the hypocrisy. You've got endless people showing up in private jets and eating steaks and caviar and riding around in caravans of expensive cars. They are selling carbon credits, though. You can offset your carbon footprint if you feel so inclined when you get to the summit.
Well, something else we need to point out is the noticeable absence from COP30 of any official delegation from the United States. Comment on that.
Yeah, this is huge. I know we're going to be going to break soon, but I think this is actually one of the big stories, is that for the first time ever, the United States government chose not to send a delegation. We did communicate with the State Department, and they did confirm to us they have nobody here, no official representation for the U.S. government at this summit. What they told us as to why was that this conference is dedicated to bankrupting the United States, and they don't want to participate in that. But I think there's a few really important considerations. We may have to pick them up after the break. Mm-hmm. But the globalists are trying to make lemonade out of the lemons here. They're saying, hey, that's fine. You know, we pass our agreements by consensus. The United States is still part of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, so the fact that they're not here just means we can pass a more ambitious agreement, and then we'll just enforce it as soon as Trump is gone and they have a new president in power, because, again, they're still bound by the UNFCCC. So we'll see how this works out, but there's actually a lot of people celebrating the fact that the U.S. didn't send a delegation because they figured they'll be able to pass a more radical agreement out of this summit without Trump's interference.
Matter of fact, I've got time to play this clip right before the break, and we'll have you comment. This is a clip that's coming from, let's see, this would be Jean Sue. Very thrilled that the U.S. is not there, and here's what she had. She's from the Center for Biological Diversity. Here's what she said.
Is not present in these hallways. Their presence is still very clear through the 1,600 fossil fuel lobbyists that are here, through their allies who are equal blockers like Saudi Arabia, who will be blocking these things because they are gas and oil producers. The United States right now is the world's #1 fracked gas producer and #1 LNG exporter and one of the top crude oil exporters and producers. That means that for the world to adopt this type of roadmap of a game plan is an essential repudiation of the Trump administration to drag us back into an era of fossil fuels. The globe needs to reject that, repudiate that, and pass this roadmap now. For subnational leaders in the United States and communities all across the U.S., they want this roadmap so that even though the federal government may not abide by it, every single community has a global north, or has a North Star to set a goal to phase out fossil fuels fairly and try to get as much funding as possible forward. Another important reason why it is critical is because the U.S. is not here this year, which means that they cannot stop this roadmap in its track here. If a roadmap comes out in this process, or the process to get that roadmap in the next few years, that means that once the Trump administration leaves, the United States administration is then obliged to meet that roadmap coming forth. And if that takes 3 years for them to come back in, that is a win as well.
Okay.
So I want to give us that context of why it's so important.
So we're going to discuss this also on the other side of the break, but because there's much to unpack there. But let me ask you, Alex, did she use fossil fuels to get there? She took quite a swipe at them.
Yeah, of course, everybody did, and that's the irony. You've got people complaining that there's no warm water, and they want to eliminate fossil fuels, and yet they also want to live high on the hog. Of course, you can't have your cake and eat it too. But really, when they talk about eliminating fossil fuels at the highest levels, they really are talking about for the United States and for the West, not for China, the Arab dictatorships, et cetera.
Yeah. Friends, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll comment further on what she said there as well. Jean Sue from the Center for Biological Diversity really kind of gloating the fact that the U.S. is not there, so now we can pass this, and once we're done with President Trump, well, the next administration, assuming that would be a Democrat from her vantage point, they would just bring the U.S. right into this so-called agreement. We'll be back in 1 minute. This is Crosstalk coming your way from the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, many are claiming that birds are modern-day dinosaurs. Can this be true?
No, it's not, Chris. Evolutionists must have an evolutionary story that they can tell people, and this is the one that they've chosen to use this decade. But the story isn't even consistent with the facts. Even given the evolutionary interpretation of the dates of the fossils, it doesn't fit. For instance, the first bird in the fossil record is dated by evolutionary standards to be before the dinosaurs, not after. And birds are so different from dinosaurs, it simply is impossible to think that a marvelously designed bird could come from a dinosaur. They are very different. The birds were created on day 5 of Creation Week and dinosaurs on day 6, just like it says back in Genesis.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. For more information, you can find us on the web at www.icr.org.
Friends, you're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Alex Newman with us today. He is in Brazil as we speak, attending COP30, the Conference of the Parties conference that's going on right now in Brazil. All evacuated right now because of the fire that broke out, but they are hoping to reconvene yet this evening. Alex, just a bit ago, we were hearing from Jean Sue from the Center for Biological Diversity. I mean, it's like they're licking their chops here. The Trump administration is not here. The U.S. is not here. They're not going to put the brakes on what we're doing here. We're going to go ahead and we want to get this passed. And then when he is gone, if there's another like Joe Biden that would come back into the scene, that type of individual, they would welcome coming back into this climate, agreement like the Paris Agreement and so forth, and they'll be bound. The U.S. will be bound by what we pass here. That's kind of concerning.
It is, Jim, and of course she's not the only one speaking like that. The former general or executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat, a lady named Cristiana Figueres, who opened the 2010 summit in Cancun with a prayer to the demonic Mayan goddess of cannibalism, war, and human sacrifice, Ixchel. She was actually publicly celebrating that the United States government was not here. She said, we're glad the United States is not here because that means we can pass a much more ambitious agreement to save the climate. So a little bit of background for folks who don't know all the ins and outs and the legal procedures. All of the agreements that they adopt are adopted by what they call consensus. And so as long as no government objects to the passage of the agreement, it's considered to be adopted. And they added as kind of an addendum, if you will, to the underlying treaty, which was passed back in 1992. That's the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. And that was a treaty that was, at least on paper, approved by the U.S. Senate. I would argue that it was still unconstitutional because the federal government cannot grant itself new powers by agreeing to a treaty. Thomas Jefferson explained that clearly. The Supreme Court itself explained that clearly in 1957 in Reed versus Covert. But the international law people pretend like it's binding on us. And so what they do is each year they come together for these climate conferences. They pass a new subsequent agreement that they add on, they tack on to the UNFCCC. And as of right now, Trump has said we're repudiating all of those subsequent agreements. However, we remain members of the UNFCCC. I know from sources within the Trump administration at the highest levels, from State Department and from EPA, that there have been discussions about leaving the UNFCCC, just withdrawing from the whole process altogether. And if that were to happen, then they'd have a much bigger problem trying to impose these things on us. But if we stay in, and if they can adopt this massive agreement by consensus without a U.S. objection, then yes, they're very hopeful that as soon as we get the next Democrat president or liberal Republican, globalist Republican, that they will enforce it and they will treat it as part of the UNFCCC treaty that needs to be imposed on Americans.
Well, Alex, though there's not been an official U.S. delegation there are some governors who have attended. Our governor, Tony Evers from Wisconsin, attended, and Governor Newsom and others, mayors from around the U.S. have attended. We understand even Governor Newsom is making agreements with foreign governments.
Yes, he is, and this is very bizarre because these are specifically prohibited by the U.S. Constitution. States are not authorized to enter into agreements with foreign powers without the consent of Congress. And, of course, Congress obviously did not consent to Governor Newsom coming down to Brazil and entering into agreements with actual communist governments. So it's very bizarre. I think more than anything, it was a campaign stop for Gavin Newsom. I think he thinks he's going to be president in 2028. It's very clear that he's going to run. But if you listen to the things he was saying, there was a lot to be gleaned from him. He did describe Trump as an invasive species. He said that he is not going to be a permanent fixture of American politics, and so don't worry, world. He will be gone soon enough, and we'll be right back to playing a constructive role in this climate process. He did make a very important concession that I think is worth mentioning, Jim. He actually told these climate people that they need to start framing this in a new way. He said Americans don't know what a carbon emission is. Where does it land? What does it look like? What does it smell like? They don't even understand when you're talking about Celsius. Americans think in Fahrenheit. So he said we need to adjust the talking points. We needed to connect with people, talk to them about jobs and creating new jobs with green energy. But very bizarre to have him here, very bizarre to have him making these agreements. And, of course, it's also a violation of the Logan Act. Unless a person is authorized by the President of the United States to enter into negotiations with foreign governments, that's a very serious crime. And, of course, the statutes have not been used much in terms of prosecuting people, but there are some real questions.
Well, it also, as you mentioned, he's got aspirations to be President of the United States, and if that would take place, we know that he would completely adopt this. I mean, he literally swallows this agenda hook, line, and sinker, doesn't he?
He absolutely does. At least he claims to. He is very enthusiastic. He couldn't stop talking about all the supposedly wonderful things California has done to help save the climate. Not much talk about the water running dry when they were trying to put out fires. Not much talk about the fact that an arsonist was implicated in the fires. But, yeah, Gavin Newsom is very, very enthusiastic about this. He's actually the co-chair of something called the We're Still In Coalition, Jim. These are governors, mayors, people purporting to speak for various subnational jurisdictions, as they call them here. And so the argument is, even though the federal government is not with the UN right now, the We're Still In coalition, which represents, they claim, more than half of the American people and more than half of the American economy, is still absolutely all on board with the UN agreement, with the Paris Agreement, and that they are going to continue to impose these things on their constituents. And we actually spoke with multiple public officials who talked about this, a commissioner from the Port of Seattle. We spoke with a state representative from New Mexico, and they were all very clear that, we still consider this these UN agreements to be binding and guiding, and we're going to continue to implement them in our jurisdictions.
So in regard to totalitarian control, Alex, I understand that there's a number of nations that have actually signed on to what's called the Declaration on Information Integrity on Climate Change, trying to combat what is called climate denialism. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I hope people will pay attention to this. My colleague Andrew Muller actually wrote a very good article about this. It's the first agreement of its kind that has been signed at one of these UN conventions. And to kind of sum it up, they agreed that misinformation, disinformation is a major problem holding back progress on these supposed issues of climate change, and that the real solution is for governments to work together to shut it all down. And so they've had multiple sessions on this, Jim. They have a point woman now who's helping to focus everybody's attention on this. Her name is Charlotte Scabin, I think her name is, something like that. And if you listen to her speak, we've got a bunch of clips of her that we're going to be releasing soon, what we've seen her say. She's saying very openly that it's not even just the people who question the climate science now who are the problem. It's even the people who are questioning the climate solutions that need to be silenced. She says they're malign actors and they're interfering with saving the world. And so, one of the top priorities for the UN and for its member governments needs to be to shut all this down, take control of the speech. It's all very Orwellian, Jim, and the fact that they're speaking so openly. I mean, we knew they believed this, but the fact that they speak so openly like this now, I think, is really cause for concern.
I understand some media was not even allowed to attend the conference.
That's right. Very, very few independent media outlets even come to things like this. Of course, it takes a major budget. We've got 3 people came down here. It costs flights. Very difficult to find a place to stay and food. So there's not a lot of media outlets that come down here that are independent of the machine. And the only other major one that we know of, Rebel Media, Rebel News, it's a Canadian outlet. They were banned back in 2016. And, we've known them for a long time. They asked a very reasonable question to a senior Canadian official about climate change. And as a result of that, the Canadian government got upset, ordered the UN to kick them out. And so they have been banned ever since. But this time they were actually enticed to come down here. They were told they would be able to get in. And then when they got here, they were told they would not be able to get in. So the UN doesn't, they don't like people to come and ask real questions. They don't like people to come and shine the light on these things. We feel very fortunate and blessed that God's made a way for us to be here. But it's true, there's very, very little independent coverage, skeptical coverage. And as far as we can tell, right now, the New Americans team is it. We're all that there is.
Wow. And I'm glad you're there. Alex Newman is in Brazil right now attending COP30. This is the United Nations Climate Change Conference that's been underway. And earlier, just hours ago, fire breaking out and many evacuating from the location there. Alex, tell us about some of the people you have met, some of the people you've interviewed, some of the things that stand out in your mind in regard to this conference.
Well, one of the major talking points of this conference is indigenous peoples. And so we've spoken with a lot of indigenous peoples, so-called. Some of them seem a little bit more indigenous than others, but a lot of them have the feathers on their heads and the war paint and things like this. And we've noticed you can really divide them into two broad categories. There are the people who've been trained to speak with the talking points, to talk about carbon dioxide and climate change and how the UN needs to solve everything. And then there are those who have not really been trained, but they're just here. And they are far more concerned about, hey, we would like electricity. We would like infrastructure. But what's happening here, and I know we're going to have to go to break, Jim, so we may carry this conversation over to the other side of the break. Indians and indigenous peoples generally are being used by the UN as a battering ram against Western civilization. They're taking real and imagined grievances of indigenous peoples against, European Christians who came to the Western Hemisphere in particular at this conference, but other places as well, Australia, things like that, and using that as a pretext to try to dismantle Western civilization. They're claiming that ancient, ancestral, indigenous wisdom needs to be used to protect the forests and protect the climate. We have spoken with several, and we'll be releasing these interviews over the coming days. Several people who said they were trained by various nonprofit organizations, generally funded by taxpayer money, and they've got very clear talking points. Only the UN can save us from the climate crisis, and it's hurting women and indigenous peoples more than anybody else. Then you've got the others who are here. Mostly, I think the UN uses them as decorations, as tokens. They had a very interesting spectacle where a whole group of supposed Amazonian Indians busted into the conference. It was obviously scripted. It was obviously prepared for the media. There are thousands of troops and tanks and helicopters and military police. There's no way a band of Indians with spears managed to bust into this conference, obviously. But if you're watching that on TV, on BBC, or, some government propaganda outlet, it looks really dramatic. Wow, Indians busting in, demanding that world leaders stop climate change. But it's been fascinating to hear that. A lot of Americans, too, who've got very, very diverse perspectives. But essentially the unifying call is the UN needs to save humanity.
Wow. Friends, you're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Alex Newman is with us today. And Alex, you're doing a lot of posting on your different platforms. Tell us where people can follow what's going on.
Thanks, Jim. TheNewAmerican.com, if people aren't signed up for the free daily headlines, that's a good place to start. Also, if you get over to X, Alex Newman _JOU, and at New American Mag, we're posting moment-by-moment updates as we get them, pictures and videos of what we're seeing. And then people can check out my website as well, libertysentinel.org. But TheNewAmerican.com, and then a lot of it, of course, will be in the print magazine for The New American.
Again, friends, TheNewAmerican.com and LibertySentinel.org. We're going to be taking a break here and come back with some more comment a little bit later. We'll be opening up phone lines as well to give you opportunity to ask Alex some questions or make a brief comment on what's going on. But certainly we have no U.S. official delegation that is there, though there are governors that are attending there. And even as Governor Newsom signed some so-called climate deals with those at the UN, he's been very hostile toward President Trump being there, even calling him an invasive species. We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk coming your way from the VCY American Network.
No matter what issues you experience in life, you will find help in the book of Psalms. The Psalms bring comfort to a hurting heart.
The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want.
As read by Brad Canterbury, VCY America is offering an audio CD, a complete reading of the book of Psalms, bringing hope in times of discouragement.
Why art thou cast down, O my soul? And why art thou disquieted within me? Hope in God.
The Psalms provide direction for daily living.
Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path.
Good for yourself and to share with others. This 5-CD set is available for a donation of $20 by calling 1-800-729-9829. 1-800-729-9829.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America. We're speaking with Alex Newman today, who is in Brazil attending COP30, the Conference of the Parties. This is the UN Climate Change Conference that's been underway. Keep in mind, it was 10 years ago at such a conference that the Paris Agreement came about, and President Trump pulled us out from it before. President Biden put us back in. President Trump has pulled us out of that once again. But, Alex, we understand that those attending, they came to a drafted text on the really this 2-week event. And their very first paragraph talks about acknowledging that climate change is a common concern of humankind, and that parties should, when taking action to address climate change, respect, promote, and consider their respective obligations on human rights, the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, the right to health, the rights of indigenous peoples, local communities, migrants, children, persons with disabilities, and people in vulnerable situations, and the right to development, as well as gender equality, empowerment of women, and intergenerational equity. I find that so interesting, as this being just another UN event, that this whole matter of gender equality and empowerment and all these other buzzwords, it fits into virtually every document that they come out with.
It does, Jim, and these are not arbitrary phrases. These are very carefully selected. They do focus groups, and they spend a lot of time thinking about these kinds of buzzwords. And each one of those phrases that you mentioned has very profound significance in terms of what they call international law. If you take the human rights angle, we can start there because it's very important. It's one of the things that they consider to be the highest importance when it comes to international human rights law. You had the International Court of Justice rule, and you and I spoke about this, Jim, a few months ago. The International Court of Justice, which is the highest UN court, they like to portray it as the Supreme Court of the world. They ruled that international human rights law requires all governments, mandates that all governments fight the so-called climate crisis with great vigor. And they actually said that failure to do so by a government or by a leader constitutes what they described as an intentionally wrongful act under international human rights law. It's the equivalent of violating somebody's human rights. Now, obviously, the UN means something very different than we do with human rights. You know, they openly say in the International Universal Declaration of Human Rights that none of your rights and privileges can be used contrary to the purposes and principles of the UN. They can be restricted at will by government under various pretexts. So it's a very different concept of rights than we have in America, but it's very, very significant in that they can use this as the basis for future prosecutions of those who don't play ball. When they spoke about the rights of indigenous peoples, we talked a little bit about that before the break. Also very important, the UN has what they call the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's UN DRIP for short. And essentially, if this is taken literally, it delegitimizes the United States as a country. They argue that every piece of territory that was ever used by an indigenous person, even that was walked upon or hunted or fished, even if it was 500 years ago, must be returned to those indigenous peoples. And, of course, they could argue that the entire continental United States was at one time used by indigenous peoples. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples came to the United States in 2012, said we needed to give back Mount Rushmore. So this completely delegitimizes the United States and Canada and really all of the nation-states of the Western Hemisphere, all of Latin America. And so when they talk about this, people need to understand this is a battering ram that is being used to undermine even the legitimacy of Christian civilization. They are pretending like the arrival of Christian civilization in the Western Hemisphere was a horror that needs to be reversed and that the UN now needs to lead the charge. So these are very dangerous propositions they're making. And we could talk about each of those things, Jim. Gender equality, really what they're talking about, if you read their agreements, is radical feminism, drive women out of the home and into the workplace, get the children into the government schools. So all these things are very, very dangerous, even though it sounds like just goofy, nice-sounding rhetoric. These are very specific terms that have meaning in international law that they hope to use to bludgeon us all into submission.
The right to health.
It's another good one. See, so under the right to health, they believe that the government has an obligation to do all the things that they consider to be necessary to make you healthy. And so that's why, for example, the Chinese Communist Party, when they released their human rights report on the United States, they attacked Donald Trump and the U.S. government for violating our right to health by not locking us down hard enough, by not enforcing vaccine mandates hard enough. So in the UN's lexicon, the right to health becomes a tool to take away your actual rights, right? So that's what people really need to understand about the UN. And the intersection with climate is so important. They actually say that the climate change is the biggest public health concern of all. Last year, we interviewed the UN World Health Organization's Director of Climate Change and Public Health, their top official on this, and she told us, climate change is the biggest public health threat. I asked her if she could please explain that, and she said, well, climate change represents global warming, and global warming means more mosquitoes, and mosquitoes are bad for your health. And, of course, I was wondering, I wonder if she's ever been to Alaska or Minnesota or Sweden, because, they have mosquitoes there, too. But that's how they're using this climate change as the pretext to take away all of your freedoms, your national sovereignty, and even now undermine the legitimacy of your religious foundations, your Bible, and, of course, Christian civilization itself.
Wow. Friends, if you'd like to start getting on board here, their questions for Alex are number 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. Alex, I'd like to also, one of the main goals, purposes is to, they have this ambition for the, lessening the carbon emission. They want to lower the temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius, I believe. Is that a goal that they're trying to project toward?
It is, and that's what they agreed to in the Paris Agreement, that they would keep it under 2 degrees Celsius increase, but preferably 1.5. But I think it's important to point out here, Jim, that none of them have any idea what that really means, right? They like to pretend like they have some magic formula that they've discovered, that if you reduce CO2 emissions by X amount, it's going to do Y to the temperature. It's a total fraud, and anybody who spends 10 minutes investigating the pseudoscience behind this will be able to see that, I think, very clearly.
The matter of carbon emissions, we continue to have the hype. President Trump calls it a hoax. Do we not need this for life to exist?
We absolutely do. It is called the gas of life by many scientists for good reason. Without enough CO2 in the atmosphere, all life on this planet as we know it dies, right? There's a danger zone. Once you get into, 150, 180 parts per million, everything dies. All the trees die, which means we all die as well. Historically, throughout the history of the Earth, there have been times when we've had concentrations as high as 1,500, 2,000, and even more parts per million. And in fact, trees, I asked Trump's climate advisor about this a few years ago, Dr. William Happer. He's a professor at Princeton University. He says the planet is starving for more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That is why farmers pump it into their greenhouses. They increase the level of CO2 in the air 4 to 5 times as much as we have naturally in the atmosphere at this moment. So really, CO2 is essential to life on Earth. It is produced by every human being through every process, including breathing and even dying. But it makes a perfect excuse if you're trying to regulate every human activity, which is why they've come up, I think, with this ridiculous, as Trump calls it, the biggest con job in the history of humanity.
Our phone number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. Mark is calling from Monroe, Wisconsin. Mark, you're on the air.
Yeah, my comment is the attitude of insubordination in the U.S. is running rampant right now. Whether it has to do, the big thing the other day was with the military. But bringing up to today's topic is I'm going to single out Gavin Newsom. It seems like he could absolutely care less about rule of law or, like he mentioned, his climate negotiations. He's going to do it regardless of what the rule of law is. So, to me, that's a major concern because, if we're just going to have some sort of willy-nilly, do whatever you want type thing, it's just going to open the floodgates to anarchy and, everything's just going to go aloof.
Mark, thank you so much. And he's referring to rogue leaders here, Alex. I mean, from what authority does Governor Newsom have to come and sign agreements with foreign entities?
Yeah, of course, he has no authority to do that. In fact, the Constitution specifically prohibits that. Again, I would encourage people to read their Constitution. Unless Congress has given its consent, which it has not, Governor Newsom has no authority at all to be negotiating agreements with foreign governments, period, end of discussion. We do have a federalist system where states retain a very large degree of sovereignty, and I think that's to be respected. The Democrats never do when they have control of the federal government. If you notice, they come up with federal policy and they say everybody must obey, whether it's an unconstitutional vaccine mandate during COVID, whether it's an unconstitutional education mandate that state and local governments allow boys into girls' locker rooms. Then they claim no state, no local government may deviate. And so we have a very dangerous situation where they try to turn this on its head. And we need to get back to a proper constitutional understanding. And, of course, at this moment, Democrats all across the country are flagrantly violating our constitutional system.
And they are, friends. We're seeing that happen just consistently here. Our number 800-733-9829. We have Amanda calling from Tucson, Arizona. Amanda, you're on the air.
Hi. I was just curious about the guy's comment about being insubordinate when I'm curious what he's talking about being insubordinate to, because the way the government is working and the way that America is starting to work, that they don't care about us, so why should we care about them? And then I also wanted to wonder question about the indigenous culture people, if they deal with gang stalking.
If they deal with what?
Gang stalking.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not making out the word. Did you hear it, Alex?
I did. Yeah, she's talking about gang stalking, and I know many people have talked about this. I certainly won't pretend to be an expert. In fact, I don't even know enough about it to make a responsible comment, so I won't. I have not heard anybody here at this UN summit deal with that, but I can say about the way they're treating indigenous people that I find it deeply offensive. Here in Brazil, the government has created these reservations for Indians, and the government will not allow anybody to go in there, including missionaries. So they are deliberately and purposely depriving these people of the opportunity, not just to learn about civilization, not just to learn about the fact that people have now discovered electricity and modern medicine and things like this, but they're depriving them of the ability to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is eternal life. And I think that, frankly, is deeply offensive, deeply problematic. And so I think when you look at the government's, here in Brazil's Indian policy, it's very dangerous, it's very misguided, and it ought to be confronted.
Thank you for the call. Friends, we're just seconds from the break, and we'll pick up more calls in the final segment here as well. Our number 800-733-9829. Alex Newman is in Brazil right now. The UN Climate Change Conference is underway. This is COP30, their 30th session, and seeking to have an agreement passed that nations there will agree to, and even with the U.S. being absent, kind of gleeful about that from the standpoint that after President Trump is gone, well, then we'll get the United States to accept what we have done here at this conference. You can follow Alex, libertysentinel.org, libertysentinel.org, and also at thenewamerican.com. And you'll find regular reports that are coming forth on this as well. A quick break, and we've got several people online. We'll get to your calls as well. This is Crosstalk on the VCY American Network.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brennan House. Our website is worldviewtube.com. Satan, as we know, tried to stop Jesus from becoming our sacrificial lamb. We see that in the scripture several times. And now Satan's trying to stop him from becoming our victorious king. Yes, the king is coming, and he'll rule for 1,000 years on earth during that millennial kingdom before the new heaven and the new earth is established. And there's a spiritual battle going, and it involves wiping out every last Jew on the planet. And isn't it interesting, as a Christian Zionist that believes in God's plan historically and biblically for the Jews, that Christian Zionists and dispensationalists who interpret the Bible correctly and with the same hermeneutical tools over and over are some of the most attacked people today, even on secular podcasts. Is it coincidental that Islam is rising while Christian persecution is rising, as well as the attack of Christians who defend the Jews? It's part of Satan's plan.
Crosstalk has taken you to Brazil today, where Alex Newman is there covering COP30. This is the conference of the parties, and it's a parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or simply known as COP30. Alex, is there an agreement that's going to be signed by the end of this conference?
Yes, at the end of every conference, they come up with an agreement, and usually they'll negotiate as long as it takes to finally get one. Typically, they'll go several days beyond the official end of the conference. So my guess is that they will be probably working into Saturday or Sunday, but eventually they'll come up with some kind of agreement that no government will object to. What they're hoping for is what they call a concrete roadmap to phase out fossil fuels. They want to accelerate the wealth redistribution, $1.3 trillion a year from Americans and Europeans to the kleptocrats who misrule the third world, and several other big provisions. But yes, no question in my mind they'll eventually get one. Without Trump here to object, it'll probably be stronger than it would have been otherwise. And then they'll just add that to the UNFCCC as part of what they consider to be binding international law.
My, let's go to Ken next in Iron River, Wisconsin. You're on the air, Ken.
Well, what are some solutions to resist this or fight this, or, what can we do?
Yeah, great question. Alex.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think it's one of the most important questions that people could be asking. The first and most important thing is I'd say people need to get up to speed on what's going on. The American media is not talking about this. That was a strategic and very deliberate decision. They know that Americans don't agree with this and wouldn't agree with it if they knew about it. So now we just have largely radio silence. So getting just informed about this is hugely significant. Congress could take major action by passing the Defund Act to get us out of the United Nations. Donald Trump could get us out of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which would be a devastating blow to this, and presumably they'd have to go back to the U.S. Senate for ratification. And I would say one of the most important things that people can do, it may not seem directly related, is protect your children and make sure they're getting a real education. One of the key talking points at this summit is real climate action has to involve education. And they will tell you. UNESCO had a big event here in partnership with Brazil and the OECD. We're going to brainwash the next generation to agree to not just understand the alleged climate crisis, but to take action on it. They're in the process of adding what they call climate literacy into the PISA, the International Standardized Academic Assessments around the world. So the brainwashing of the next generation is seen as critical to these people. The more Americans say, no, we're not going to let you brainwash our children, the better off we will be as these totalitarians move forward to eliminate our liberty and destroy our country.
And keep in mind, there's a lot of politicians already posturing for November 2026 elections, and Alex, finding out where they stand and holding them accountable is so critical as well.
Absolutely, yep. And, very few, even Democrats, are talking about this anymore because they know it doesn't make good politics. If you notice, Kamala Harris very rarely spoke about climate change during her campaign. So they know this is unpopular. If the voters hold them accountable, that will help a lot. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse was here blabbering about this. So we must know where our politicians stand, and we must hold them accountable. And the New American actually has a great, it's called the Freedom Index, so that people can see where their politicians are landing on all of these issues and then hold them accountable for their voting record.
Ken, thanks for the call. Josh is next. Hi, Josh. You're on the air.
Hi, thanks for having me. I just wanted to point out the hilarious hypocrisy of this Indigenous Act portion of what they want to try to claim to do, take away land from the United States, and we have to give it back to the Indigenous. But what they don't want to give back the land of Israel to the indigenous people who live there.
Interesting.
To the Jews who,
Not those indigenous
all the
people.
Yeah.
Philistines and stuff, and took the land for themselves and was given it by God.
Yeah.
And they were indigenous to that land, I think, before they got dispersed.
Great point, Josh. Thank you so very much. And we've got Linda from Sardinia, Ohio. You're on the air.
Yes, this is Linda Hensley. Global warming is proven to be the biggest lie that these people have ever come up with, that all the green stuff needs carbon dioxide, just like the scientists have said, and I can't believe that they're still getting by with this. Anyway, we're just going to have to keep praying and praying and praying. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Well, and that's part of it. Alex, we don't need to continue going down this path that we've been going down, and President Trump has been, putting the brakes on this. There's much further we can go on this, but that's why he's called it the hoax. It really is a hoax.
It is. He's called it a fraud, a hoax, the biggest con job in the history of humanity. He's absolutely correct, and so I'm glad the Overton window is shifting on that. The Word of God tells us that the heavens and the earth are going to be destroyed. They're going to burn up, and it has nothing to do with your carbon footprint or your SUV or your hairspray bottle. And we need to understand this is really a demonic agenda. We know it's a lie. We know who the father of lies is, and so we need to be in prayer about this. We need to be in the Word of God about this, and we need to pray that the truth would be exposed, that the liars would be exposed, and that many of these people who are so misguided, who've been taken captive by Satan to do his will, would come to their senses, repent, and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen. That's the bottom line to all of this, folks. And Alex, we're down to 90 seconds, but just one other comment. As we talk about these various summits and issues going on, they're not isolated. They're all interconnected. And I know that there was a reference to the Global Digital Compact that has a connection to the Summit of the Future. I mean, all of this is all coming together like a spider's web.
It is. It's an effort to create a totalitarian one-world political, economic, and religious system. And so, we need to be discerning. We need to be wise. We need to be humble. And we need to seek the Lord and His will in all of this.
Well, Alex, we so appreciate you carving out the time. And again, I'd like you to go through the platforms where our listeners can stay informed on this and also be praying for your team that is there at the conference as well.
Thank you so much, Jim. So thenewamerican.com, people can read our articles, they can watch our videos, they can sign up for the free daily headlines, they can even subscribe to the print magazine, which I hope they will do. They can follow us on X. Mine is AlexNewman_JOU. New American Mag is The New Americans, and there's going to be a lot more in the days to come, so I encourage people to tune in. And once again, I thank you so much, Jim, for having me on the program. Really grateful, and God bless you and all the listeners.
Great, and to you as well, and appreciate you joining us here. Alex Newman attending the conference again, had to evacuate from the facility due to the fire that broke out, and certainly it's important to keep them in prayer. I know the sessions are looking to reconvene here shortly, even this evening. Let me leave you with Genesis 8, verse 22. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest and cold and heat and summer and winter and day and night shall not cease. Friends, God's in control. As Alex said, one day judgment is going to come. The earth is going to melt with a fervent heat. There is judgment coming. Now it's our job to warn people about that coming judgment. That's a global warming that can be avoided by placing trust in Jesus Christ, the Savior. God bless you, friends. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.